Hello, everyone. Welcome to, I think this is week 10. Maybe? I think so. Anyway, it's the week we're going to talk about occupational stress and burnout. Hope everybody was able to take advantage of the time last week to work on your rough drafts. Remember, they're due this Sunday, so make sure you turn those in and please try to have them as close to a finished product as possible. Because the closer you are to being done, the better I can give you feedback on what you have. If you don't turn in anything or don't turn in much, I really can't give you any feedback as far as how your paper is going. Also, it's worth 30 points, and simply turning something in is not going to get you 30 points. It's got to be pretty close to a finished product. So once you get those turned in on Sunday, I'll get those turned back to you as quickly as possible so you can start making any kind of corrections or addressing any of those comments on your final draft. I apologize for the small hiatus from the videos. I've had some technical difficulties, but I believe I have everything fixed now. So anyway, here we go with occupational stress and burnout. So stress is a term that I'm sure everyone is familiar with. I'm sure everybody here has felt stress, at sometime or another during their life, professionally, personally, probably both. I know I experienced some today while I was watching my Michigan State Spartans defeat Duke in the Elite Eight game to earn a spot in the Final Four. Now, obviously, that's not the kind of stress we're going to talk about today, but it was stressful. Watching that game, it was a 1 point game, went back and forth. I don't know how much longer I can do that. But anyway, so occupational stress, it's present in just about any type of occupation. But when you talk about criminal justice professionals, they experience stress that's somewhat unique to their profession based on, the job that they have and the things that they encounter. So if stress is not addressed, it can lead to real poor outcomes, not only for the individual, but also for the organization and the people that that organization um, deals with, right? So let's start kind of broad here. What is stress? Okay, so if you think about people in general, think about your life. Most people want to operate in a fairly steady state. But most people want things to be pretty status quo, right? Everything just kind of going along, doing the same things. Um, and when things happen, generally people can tolerate, small deviations from their desired state, from this state of, calm that they're in. But when you start having major deviations, that can cause people problems or stress. So if you break this down, the external stimuli that cause these deviations, we'll call them stressors. And there's two main types when you're talking about occupational stress. There's two main types of stressors: routine occupational stressors and traumatic stressors. So the routine stressors are exactly what they sound like, right? Those are the ones that workers encounter on a fairly regular basis, while traumatic stressors are those that are not routinely encountered, and it's some kind of traumatic event, right? Some type of big, uh, career-changing, potentially kind of event. So then we get into the term strain. Okay, so strain essentially refers to how the person reacts to the stressors. Okay, so the stressors happen, the person reacts, and that's the strain. And that can result in things like sleepless nights, hypertension, irritability. Okay, so that's the strain. So then finally, you move into kind of the coping. How do people cope with the strains and their perceptions of the stressors? And what are their coping mechanisms? Then all those things factor into someone's stress level. So I mentioned just a little bit earlier that criminal justice professionals experience stressors that may be somewhat different from other occupations. Obviously, because of the nature of criminal justice occupations, it's impossible to discuss each and every possible stressor that someone may come across through the course of their career. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of follow the discussion in the book and break down the stressors into 6 main categories. Okay, the first factor or the first stressor or category of stressor is factors inherent in the work. Okay, these are stressors directly related to the job itself. For example, correctional officers having to deal with dangerous inmates, criminal justice professionals being exposed to actual harm, threatened harm, or even perceptions of harm. Those are all leading stressors of criminal justice professionals. So then you also get into things like work schedules, shift demands. Police are on kind of a rotating schedule a lot of times. So they'll work days and they'll work nights and they'll work a swing. And it just keeps rotating like that. And that can be stressful for people, especially people that have family commitments, and those types of things. Work schedules like that can cause stress. Other items, such as workloads, like a probation and parole officer's caseload, especially if they're shorthanded, right? What's the caseload like? Is the caseload high? Do they feel like there's more cases than what they can handle efficiently? Right? All those things can cause stress. So the second one then is the individual's role in the organization. That can also lead to stress. The two main concepts here that we're going to focus on are role ambiguity and role conflict. So role ambiguity essentially is not understanding what one's role is, okay, and that can be very stressful. Similarly, being tasked to complete some type of work and not knowing how you're supposed to do it or why you're doing it, all those things can be stressful. When I first started as a conservation officer, I was assigned to a county that was about 2 hours away from my immediate supervisor. Now, you may think that sounds great, and I'm not going to lie, in a lot of ways it was. But they essentially dropped me off there. They were like, go do your job. And I was like, I don't really know what my job is supposed to be. That was pretty stressful because there really wasn't anybody nearby I could ask. I couldn't ask anybody anything quickly. So the ambiguity of what my role was supposed to be there actually caused me quite a bit of stress there at the very beginning of my career. So I pretty much just had to wing it for a while and pretend like I knew what I was doing, even though I really had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. So role conflict can also lead to stress. And role conflict is when you have aspects of your job that seemingly contradict each other. And kind of the common discussion or common example we use for this is for a probation or parole officer. You have to be not only in the role of the enforcer, but you also have to work, in a social worker role as well. And those are two very different types of roles. And having to navigate both of those can cause stress for some people. All right, work relationships also lead to stress, and this can refer to any kind of relationship. Negative relationship with supervisors, negative relationship with peers, relationships with people that don't actually work in your organization that you have to deal with on a routine basis. Any kind of poor relationships like that with people that you have to interact with on a somewhat regular basis, all that can lead to stress. Career issues such as getting ready for retirement or not getting to retirement fast enough, possibilities of being laid off, lack of promotional opportunities. This list can go on and on and on. We talk about different career aspects or career issues. So those type of things can be significant sources of stress as well. Organizational issues. And when I say organizational issues, I'm referring to actual organizational factors, such as how are decisions made? Who's making the decisions? How is the organization organized? Like, how is it set up? What does the structure look like? Does the structure actually work? Policies and procedures, right? All the actual official aspects of the organization, those can cause stress as well. All right, that brings us into home-work interface. And this is a significant source of stress for criminal justice professionals. What we're talking about here is how home and work, how those environments interact with each other. So if you're talking about home versus, work environments, when you're talking about criminal justice, you're back to some of these issues of safety aspects of the job, right? If you have a family, is the family worried about, the person's safety? Working nights and weekends and holidays, working when other people are off, working shift work, missing family events. All those things can lead to stress and can be significant sources of stress for people. So that pretty much is the 6 different categories that the book kind of lined out as sources of stress. So what happens then, right? Okay, so we have all these stressors. So what? Well, I mentioned negative outcomes a couple times, and that's kind of where all this stuff goes. Okay, you have these stressors, and then how people react to them. It can lead to negative outcomes, and one of the major ones is burnout. Okay, so burnout is persistent negative work-related state of mind characterized by exhaustion and distress and reduced effectiveness, decreased motivation, and then developing of dysfunctional attitudes and behaviors at work. Essentially, burnout is you're done, right? You're done. You're stressed out, and you're just exhausted, and you don't want to do anything anymore. You get a bad attitude. Uh, so, if you talk about reasons why burnout happens, they're very similar to the ones that are occupational stress, but burnout is different than stress. People have occupational stress, but reaching the level of burnout is a whole nother level of stress. So stress and burnout can lead to stuff like psychological issues like anxiety, PTSD, dissatisfaction, nervousness. Can also manifest in physical symptoms like high blood pressure, heart disease, headaches, or it can cause behavioral problems, drinking, drug use, bullying at work, intimate partner violence. So stress and burnout are serious topics because they can have very, very detrimental effects if they're not addressed. So how do we? How do you address stress and burnout? But there's three kind of broad categories of interventions. Obviously, there's lots of ways that you can address stress and burnout within an organization. So we're going to stay broad here. We're going to talk about three kind of broad categories of interventions. The first are primary interventions, and these are designed to reduce organizational stressors, the ones we were talking about before. How decisions are made, how's the structure set up, policies, procedures. Okay, primary interventions address those kinds of issues, and that makes them very rare because organizations don't like to address those types of issues, or they may not think that those are actually issues and that there's other issues that are more important when it comes to stress and burnout. But those are primary interventions, are those that are strictly about organizational factors. So you have secondary interventions, and those address how individuals react to stressors. So if these aren't done properly, you might get some short-term effects with these, but can actually produce long-term harm. So some of the more effective ones that they have these days and have found are wellness-type programs to support overall health. Those that provide physical fitness and oh gosh, going a little blank here. But anyway, so the promotion of long-term health benefits. Okay, ones that provide workers with better ways to cope with stress, giving workers time to work out, having healthy eating seminars, those kind of things. Those kind of interventions have been shown to have some positive effects. And then there's tertiary interventions. And these are pretty common ones too. These are designed to help with the negative outcomes that come, whether it's health problems, aggression, substance abuse, whatever those negative outcomes are at the end. Okay, so tertiary interventions are stuff like counseling, treatment, medical care, right? They're all things that are designed to address those negative outcomes, like the health problems. So which of these is most important? Well, you really need all three of them, right? All three of these really are important for having a resilient workforce, but most organizations don't have all three. Most organizations focus on secondary and tertiary interventions, which is good. Don't get me wrong. It's good to work on those things, but if you really want the full effect, if you really want to really address stress and burnout in your organization, you really have to look at all the factors and have all three types of interventions if you really want to have maximum effect. So with that, I'm going to stop here today. There's some good chapters at the end, or good articles at the end of the chapter. Make sure you read them. There's some really good research in there talking about job stress and burnout. Make sure you turn in your rough drafts this week, and also remember to complete the discussion board. And as always, let me know if you have questions, and I'll see you next week.